One of the drivers under the most pressure in 2024 is Daniel Ricciardo, and Daniel has just had one of his best results of the season, a P4 result that AlphaTauri/VCarb has not had since 2021. 2 weekends in a row with pretty convincing results and actually beating out Yuki with the exception of a couple of things. What's made Ricciardo come back in the season so far? And is he really back in form? Will he actually beat out Yuki in the season? And do the results speak for themselves? Before getting into the video, I wanted to thank you guys for 38,000. Thank you so much for support on the channel. If you're new here, I'd love if you subscribe. It'd mean the world to me. But let's get into the Daniel Ricciardo video. The biggest talking point about China for Daniel was him getting a new chassis. Alan Permain, the sporting director over there, already said that Daniel would be getting a new chassis for the Chinese GP to see if he can improve upon his results. Now, we knew that this chassis wasn't going to actually change anything other than maybe changing Daniel Ricciardo's mental approach to the race weekend. Alan Permain even says the new chassis is not expected to significantly impact the performance of Ricciardo's car. Nothing with this new chassis was an upgrade. Sometimes the chassis can be more lighter weight. In this era of cars where weight limit is super important, and really any era, the weight limit is a very important part as to if your car can be competitive or not. Look at Alpine in Miami, considering they just put the car down in weight, they're a much more competitive car. But there was no actual performance gain, it was just more of a mental thing, and now I guess the drivers can drive a little bit better, not having to worry about a chassis being broken, not being able to race on the weekend. There have been times that the chassis has been an issue for a driver. We've heard both ways. We've heard it being a mental thing, but we've also seen sometimes that the wind tunnel and the actual simulation data can't pick up on a chassis having a problem. In all these races, while Ricciardo has been behind, it hasn't been by a big margin. It's been about a 0.2 margin in qualifying and in the race. There are tracks where Ricciardo has been pretty much up to pace with Yuki, but we've definitely seen an improvement and jump since the chassis coming. If we look at 2024 results from Daniel and Yuki, we can compare the two. Daniel in Bahrain had a P13, P16, P12, 2 DNFs in both Japan and China, and in Miami, a P15. Now, these are not including the sprint races. In the sprint race in China, Daniel Ricciardo actually performed pretty well, but nothing in the points. And obviously, with the recent form in Miami, he got a P4 position, which was an incredible job defending Carlos for so many laps. We'll talk more upon that. Yuki doesn't look too dissimilar. If you look at P14, P15, it's not like he did much better than him in Bahrain or Saudi. Now, this can be contributed to both of them being stuck in DRS trains in both Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, and the car just wasn't there. The first upgrades actually ended up coming in Australia, but Yuki finished in a high P7 finish. Now, yes, this was with the help of Fernando getting a penalty, which Yuki was supposed to be P8 but finished P7 because of Fernando's penalty. But then in Japan, he scores a point, and in Miami, he finishes in P7 while his teammate is a far way away in the race after an amazing Saturday. The actual results say a lot. Yuki definitely has been the driver on top, and I would say that he's been consistently better than Daniel Ricciardo in any session. There have been several reports on Red Bull still not being interested in Yuki, even with an amazing start to the season, and showing himself off in 2023 as well. The team seems to think that Yuki doesn't have that it factor, and Ricciardo is definitely getting pushed by this Red Bull team to step it up, and this team is definitely pushing for Daniel to be that upper guy in the VCarb team. Helmut Marko and Christian Horner have both been very vocal that Daniel Ricciardo is a leader, and given the right equipment, he can perform very well. Well, we ended up seeing that in Miami. He was able to defend Carlos Sainz for pretty much the whole entire race, kept Piastri behind, and his pace was at a very, very high level. Ricciardo was about 0.86 off of the front runner, which was Max Verstappen, shockingly enough, and Yuki was about 1.58. So Ricciardo had a convincing 0.7 on Yuki in the race. A lot of this has to do with Kevin Magnussen holding up the back of the grid, but this definitely was a Saturday that Ricciardo was on it completely. After the sprint race, we could go into changing the car with parc fermé broken, and that's when we ended up getting into qualifying, and Ricciardo ended up qualifying P18, with Yuki Tsunoda going all the way into Q3, which really helped him in the race. Looking at the race with Norris as the front runner, Yuki was now 0.93 off of Norris, and Ricciardo was 1.55, and if you look at the grand scheme of things, Ricciardo was the slowest driver on the grid in this Grand Prix. Daniel did start off on the hard tire, and when the safety car came, he didn't pit. He ended up actually waiting to pit on that medium a little bit later into the race, which was definitely not the right strategy call. So a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, wow, he was a ways off in this race. But realistically, he was stuck in a train for all of the race. He started on the hard tire while Yuki started on the medium, ended up benefiting off of the safety car and getting a hard tire on, with what was probably the right strategy call, at least for the VCARB team. But that's nothing to take away from Yuki. He was brilliant in this race. He defended well, he kept George Russell behind, and by the end of the race, he ended up opening the gap from what was a 1 second gap about 15 laps ago to about a 6 to 7 second gap on George Russell, in probably the faster car. And we've seen this time and time again, Australia being your example, and in general throughout the 2024 season, qualifying has been the Yuki special, at least in this VCARB team. He's been able to put that car up in places that we have not seen this car in what definitely isn't a top 5 team. Yuki is definitely pushing the car to its limits, but when Daniel Ricciardo is your teammate and you're expected to win, it's hard to say he's getting everything out of the car, and I think that's where the doubt comes from Red Bull. To me, I feel like that's unfair. He's doing everything that he's been told, and really, you can only assess him against his teammates, and considering what he's been doing, he definitely deserves a bigger reputation over there at Red Bull. But this might just be a sign for him to look elsewhere, considering how the market is volatile, and Aston Martin obviously will look to take him depending on the scenario with Lance Stroll. I would love to believe that Daniel Ricciardo is back, but it's too early to tell. With these races, it's definitely a step in the right direction, but we shouldn't just jump on the train just yet. What's promising is that he's showing form quickly, and while he is under pressure, he's still performing well, which is a big sign that he is improving and he's working upon those weaknesses that he has. I made an entire video talking about the driving style weaknesses that he has and how he struggles upon that corner entry and keeping the car's rear end stable. Yuki does love a car definitely on the nose, but so does Ricciardo. There's not too much to actually talk about between their styles because both love an aggressive front-ended car. The VCARB is far from what both drivers want, but it's definitely not a bad car in the scheme of things. The car does suffer from corner entry, especially with understeer. We saw that in Miami when Ricciardo was trying to make that turn into 16, kissed the corner a couple of times, but he was able to control it in the race, so he is working upon that weakness that he's always had. He's never been a big fan of understeer, and the McLaren car definitely showed that was a big weakness of his. The actual problems between the McLaren and the VCARB are nothing alike because that had a lot to do with braking in that understeer mode that Daniel found so foreign. With this now going into the European leg where definitely Daniel Ricciardo has the experience on Yuki with tracks like Imola, but Monaco being a special of his, which hasn't been a special for a bit, but he used to be the king of the streets there. I'm interested to see if this form keeps up for Daniel, and I have a lot of faith. But with that being said, I don't think he's back yet. We shouldn't be too quick to make judgment in only a very small amount of time, but I definitely think that he's improving a lot upon what the struggles were in the beginning of the season. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please leave a like, subscribe, enemy in the world, and peace.